I got used to feeling nothing. Not sadness exactly. That would have been easier to explain. It was more like static. Like living inside a room where the television never fully turns off. A low emotional hum that follows you everywhere until you stop noticing it. I'm older now. Older in the ways that don't show up in photographs first. The tired hands, the silence after work. The way empty apartments sound at night. I almost stopped recording this. Part of me still thinks I should, because saying any of this out loud feels dangerous somehow. Embarrassing, maybe, like admitting I survived too long without warmth and accidentally got used to it. But something in me won't stay quiet anymore. Not after you. I don't think you realize what happened. Maybe I don't either. I remember the first night clearly, which is strange because most of those years blur together now. Airports, hotel rooms, elevators with mirrored walls. Late dinners where nobody actually tasted the food. Success can hollow a person out in ways people applaud. Nobody tells you that part. I spent years surrounded by noise and still felt emotionally invisible. Cameras, meetings, people shaking my hand like they knew me. Then I'd end up back in some silent hotel room with city lights bleeding through thin curtains, eating cold fries out of a paper container because I was too tired to order anything decent. Funny, the details that survive. The smell of stale coffee, the buzz of an ice machine down the hallway. One sock half hanging off my foot while I stared at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, wondering why none of it felt real anymore. I think that's when something in me started shutting down. Not dramatically, quietly, like a house losing power room by room. Anyway, maybe that sounds heavier than I meant it to. I just mean, I got good at functioning while emotionally disappearing. You probably know what I mean. People think loneliness looks obvious. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks like competence, like answering emails on time, like smiling at waitresses, like remembering birthdays while forgetting yourself completely. God, I never said that out loud before. There was this diner I used to stop at after long drives outside the city. Open all night. Flickering neon sign that hummed louder during winter. The woman working the counter never asked questions. I liked that about her. I'd sit there around 2 in the morning wearing the same wrinkled jacket for days, stirring coffee that had already gone cold. One night she asked if I wanted a refill and I almost said, "No thanks, I'm trying to feel something." I actually laughed afterward, not because it was funny. I think my body just didn't know what else to do. That was a bad year. No, that's not true. There were several bad years. See, I still do that, minimize things after admitting them. I think I became afraid of being fully seen. Because once people really see exhaustion in you, they start stepping carefully, like you're already halfway broken. And maybe I was. Maybe that's why meeting you unsettled me so much. You didn't arrive dramatically, no music, no lightning strike, nothing cinematic. Honestly, you looked tired too. That's what I noticed first. Not your beauty, though you had that in the quiet kind of way that sneaks up on people. It was your eyes. They looked like someone who had survived disappointment without becoming cruel. I remember thinking, that's rare. We were standing near the back of a grocery store late at night. Strange place for your life to shift a little. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Someone dropping glass bottles 2 aisles over. You apologized when our carts bumped. You apologized, even though it was my fault. I still remember that. And I remember how gently you smiled afterward, like you were trying not to take up too much space in the world. God, that hurt me a little, because I recognized it. That carefulness. That habit of shrinking your own presence so nobody gets overwhelmed by your needs. Maybe you learned that young. Maybe life taught it to you later. I don't know. But I saw it. And something inside me reacted before I understood why. I think? No. I know. I had spent so many years around performance that your softness confused me. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You weren't selling a version of yourself. You just felt real. That scared me more than I expected. I should probably admit something here. Halfway through my life, I stopped believing tenderness could survive adulthood. That's the truth. I thought people became practical eventually. Guarded. Transactional. I thought everyone secretly carried exit plans in their back pocket, including me, especially me. I got very good at leaving emotionally before anyone else could. Work helped with that. Constant movement, constant distraction, airports at dawn, hotel keycards, conversations that never got personal enough to matter. You can survive a long time that way. But surviving and living aren't the same thing. I didn't understand that until much later. Maybe pain changes the temperature of a person. Maybe after enough disappointment, your soul starts preparing for winter before it arrives. I think mine did. And then you smiled at me beside a stack of discounted cereal boxes at 11:30 at night, like the world hadn't ruined kindness yet. I didn't see it coming. That's the part I keep returning to. Not love, not destiny, nothing dramatic like that. Just warmth, small, human, unexpected. I remember driving home afterward through rain that barely touched the windshield. One hand on the steering wheel, old song playing too softly to recognize. And for the first time in years, the silence in the car didn't feel hostile. It felt different. Like something had quietly sat down beside me. That frightened me a little. Because hope is dangerous when you've spent years teaching yourself not to need anyone. I parked outside my apartment and stayed in the car longer than necessary. The building lights were mostly off. Somebody's television flickered blue through curtains upstairs. My hands looked tired against the steering wheel. I remember thinking, don't do this again. Don't start wanting things. But another part of me, a quieter part, the part I buried to survive all those empty years, it didn't want to stay buried anymore. And maybe that was the beginning. Or maybe the beginning happened long before either of us arrived there. I don't know. I just know something changed after that night. Something small. Something terrifying. Something alive. And I think part of me had been waiting for it longer than I admitted. There was a time I stopped answering people. Not calls. Not messages. Just emotionally. I could still hold conversations. Still smile when expected. Still sit through dinners and meetings and long rehearsed interactions where everyone said the right things at the right times. But inside, I had already gone somewhere else. I'm old enough now to recognize exhaustion when I see it in a mirror. Not physical exhaustion, soul exhaustion, the kind that settles into your posture, into the way you close doors quietly, because even noise feels demanding. I almost skipped this part, 'cause talking about loneliness honestly makes me uncomfortable, especially with you. Especially because you somehow make me want to tell the truth anyway. Something inside me won't let me hide behind charm anymore. Not completely. I used to think emotional neglect only counted if someone was cruel. But sometimes people don't destroy you. Sometimes they just slowly stop reaching for you. That leaves marks too. I remember this apartment I lived in years ago. Top floor. Terrible heating. The pipes knocked all winter, like somebody trapped inside the walls trying to get out. I'd come home late and leave lamps on in different rooms before leaving again the next morning, not because I needed the light. I think I just couldn't stand the feeling of returning to total darkness. Funny what survival turns into. There were medicine bottles near the sink back then, half-empty coffee cups. Dry cleaning I forgot to pick up for weeks. I kept buying groceries that expired untouched. I told people I was busy. That was the easier explanation. The truth was, I had stopped believing anyone noticed whether I was okay or not. God. That sounds worse out loud. Forget that. No, don't. Maybe that's the whole problem. I spent too many years swallowing pain before it reached language. You know what I remember most from that period? Not heartbreak exactly. Silence. The specific kind that settles after midnight when the city outside finally calms down and there's nobody left to perform strength for. I'd sit on the kitchen floor sometimes because the tiles stayed cold against my back. Television on mute, one sock missing somewhere in the apartment, rain tapping weakly against the windows. And I'd think, so this is what becoming emotionally invisible feels like. Not abandoned dramatically, just gradually forgotten. I think that realization changes people. It changed me. I became overly independent after that, aggressively self-sufficient. The kind of man who carried everything himself because depending on others started feeling humiliating. Need became dangerous. I convinced myself I preferred it that way. No expectations, no disappointments. Simple. Except it wasn't simple. It was lonely in a way I didn't know how to confess. You probably understand that kind of loneliness. The functional kind. The kind hidden beneath routines and responsibilities and answering "I'm fine" too quickly. You carry yourself carefully too. Like someone who learned early that tenderness can disappear without warning. I noticed that the second time we met. You were standing outside a bookstore while it rained. Not under the awning exactly, just near enough to avoid getting soaked. Holding your sleeves over your hands because it was colder than you expected. You looked peaceful for a moment before you saw me. Then you apologized for looking distracted. You apologized again. I remember wanting to tell you, you don't have to earn softness every second, but I didn't say it. I wasn't brave enough yet. Instead, we walked together for a while, quietly. Streetlights reflecting gold across wet sidewalks, cars hissing past in the rain. And the strange thing was, the silence between us didn't feel empty. That unsettled me, because most silence in my life had always carried absence inside it. But yours felt attentive somehow. Emotionally intelligent silence, that's what it was. You listened without rushing to fix things. Without interrupting discomfort the second it appeared. I'm not used to that. Most people panic around sadness. They try to cover it quickly, joke over it. Solve it before it breathes too long. You didn't. You just stayed. God, I think that's when things started breaking open in me a little. There's something I haven't admitted yet. I became afraid of kindness after a while. Not because kindness hurt me. Because losing it did. I think once you survive enough emotional distance, tenderness starts feeling temporary by default. Like something borrowed. Something already halfway gone while it's happening. So every time you looked at me gently, some part of me prepared for disappearance. That's exhausting, by the way. wanting warmth while instinctively bracing against it. I still do it sometimes. Even now, speaking to you like this, part of me wants to pull back, pretend I'm saying less than I am. I don't usually talk like this. There was one night not long after we met where I almost convinced myself to stop seeing you entirely, not because I didn't want to, because I did. Too much, maybe. I was driving home after dinner with you. Highway nearly empty. Gas station lights glowing in the distance like tiny islands in the dark. And I caught myself imagining what it would feel like if you stayed in my life. That thought scared me enough, I almost disappeared first. That's the ugly truth. I've spent so many years preparing for people to leave that sometimes I leave emotionally before they get the chance. Maybe that sounds cowardly. Maybe it is. But abandonment teaches strange reflexes. You survive enough loss, and eventually your nervous system starts treating attachment like danger. I didn't know how lonely I'd become until someone gentle entered the room. That's the part nobody warns you about. The body remembers warmth immediately, even after years, especially after years. I remember you laughing once in the passenger seat while trying to open one of those impossible ketchup packets from a drive-through bag. Completely ordinary moment. Nothing important. And yet I still think about it. The sound of your laugh, the fog on the windows, your tired smile afterward. I think healing begins in moments people almost overlook. Not grand transformations, not speeches, just tiny interruptions to loneliness. Maybe that's why you changed something in me without trying, not by rescuing me, just by remaining emotionally present long enough that I started remembering who I was before survival made me quiet. And honestly, that realization frightened me more than being alone ever did. Because once your heart starts waking up again, you can lose things all over. I think part of me knew that. I think part of me was already terrified of needing you. And still, when I picture those nights now, the rain, the bookstores, the long drives home with your voice still lingering softly in the car, I can't pretend nothing inside me started thawing. Not anymore. I got used to carrying everything alone. Not because I was strong, because eventually nobody asked if I needed help anymore. There's a difference. I'm older now in the way buildings get older, structurally intact from a distance. But if you listen carefully enough, you hear the strain underneath. Pipes rattling, floors settling, small fractures hidden behind paint. I almost stopped talking after the last chapter. Part of me still wants to disappear whenever I get too honest. It's instinct now, like emotional recoil. Say something vulnerable, then immediately search for the nearest exit. But something in me keeps returning to you anyway. Maybe because you never pushed. Maybe because you looked at me like I was still human, even when I felt emotionally worn down to the bone. I haven't told you about the hospital yet. Strange how certain memories wait quietly for years before asking to be touched. It was winter. I remember that clearly because the parking garage smelled like cold concrete and wet jackets. I'd been sleeping badly for months already. Too much work, too much silence afterward. That was my pattern. Overwork during the day, emotional collapse in private. Nobody notices when successful men are falling apart quietly. They just assume exhaustion is ambition. I sat in a waiting room for hours under fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and unfinished. Vending machine humming near the corner. Television mounted high on the wall playing a sitcom nobody watched. I remember an older man sleeping awkwardly beside his wife with his chin against his chest. Every few minutes, even half asleep, his hand would reach toward hers like his body needed reassurance she was still there. That image stayed with me. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because I realized I couldn't remember the last time I reached for someone naturally like that, without fear, without calculation. I think survival made me emotionally cautious in ways I mistook for maturity. That's hard to admit. God, maybe harder than I expected. The truth is, I spent years pretending I didn't need intimacy because needing it felt humiliating after enough disappointment. So I became useful instead, reliable, busy, capable. People admire that in men. They rarely ask what it costs us. I'd return home after 14-hour days and sit in dark living rooms without turning lights on immediately. Jacket still on, keys still in my hand, just sitting there, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes longer. I needed time to become a person again after performing functionality all day. I never told anyone that, actually. I don't think I even admitted it fully to myself until now. Funny how truth works. It waits until someone safe appears nearby. You did that somehow. Not intentionally, I think. You just made honesty feel less impossible. I remember the first time you touched my hand without thinking about it. We were crossing a street at night, traffic louder than usual. Your fingers wrapped briefly around my wrist to pull me away from a turning cab that came too fast around the corner. Tiny moment. But my entire body reacted like something ancient had been disturbed. Not desire exactly, recognition. Like some exhausted part of me whispered, "There you are." And immediately afterward, I pulled away emotionally for almost a week. See? That's what I mean. Every time tenderness got close, my instincts treated it like danger. You noticed, too, you never accused me of it, which somehow made it worse. You'd just grow quieter, more careful. Like you understood disappearing was the only defense some people ever learned. I hated myself a little for that. Because the truth, the real truth, is that I wanted closeness more than I knew how to survive it. There. That's the confession I've been circling. I was terrified of being needed because I was terrified of failing someone again. I think somewhere along the way I started believing love eventually turns into disappointment, no matter how gently it begins. So I kept preparing for endings before beginnings even settled. That's exhausting for the soul. You know what finally broke me a little? Not a fight, not some dramatic confession. It was one ordinary night in your kitchen. You were making tea, wearing one of those oversized sweaters with sleeves covering half your hands. Rain against the windows again. Seems like rain follows every important memory I have now. I was talking about work. Nothing personal. And you looked at me very softly and said, "You don't have to be impressive here." That was it. God. I can still feel what happened inside my chest when you said that. Because I didn't realize how long I'd been performing worthiness, how long I believed affection had to be earned constantly through usefulness or success or emotional restraint. You saying that exposed something I buried years ago. I think I stopped believing anyone could love me without conditions. Even writing that makes me uncomfortable. Forget I said, no, don't. Maybe that's the most honest thing I've admitted yet. There were nights after seeing you where I'd sit alone in my apartment, replaying tiny moments like a man studying evidence of something impossible. The way you listened fully. The way you left space for silence. The way you noticed when I withdrew without forcing me to explain it immediately. You made me feel visible, not admired, not desired, seen. Do you understand how frightening that is after years of emotional invisibility? I started sleeping differently after you entered my life. That sounds strange, but it's true. For years, I slept like someone preparing for emergencies, restless, alert, half awake even in dreams. Then slowly, somehow, my body stopped bracing as hard. I'd wake before sunrise sometimes and realize I wasn't carrying the same heaviness in my chest. Not gone completely, just softer around the edges. And that terrified me too, because hope returns quietly, not all at once. It enters through ordinary moments. Shared coffee. Oh, late conversations. Comfortable silence inside parked cars. Someone remembering how you take your tea. Small things. Small enough to miss if your heart hasn't been starving. I think mine had been starving longer than I admitted. Maybe my whole life in certain ways. And now when I picture the future, which still feels dangerous to do, I sometimes catch myself imagining space beside me that no longer feels empty by default. That thought still scares me. But it doesn't scare me enough to run anymore. At least, I don't think it does. Didn't think I could come back from that kind of numbness, not fully. I thought maybe people only get one real chance at emotional openness, and if life bruises it badly enough, that part stays closed forever. Like an old storefront with the lights turned off and dust gathering slowly in the windows. I'm older now. Old enough to know survival can disguise itself as living for years before you notice the difference. Old enough to recognize how much of my life I spent enduring instead of feeling. I almost didn't finish this. There's still a part of me that gets embarrassed by tenderness. A part that wants to joke suddenly, or change subjects whenever things become too honest. But something inside me is finally more afraid of silence than vulnerability, and I think that happened because of you. Not because you saved me. You didn't. You just stayed long enough that I stopped feeling invisible around another human being. That changed everything. I remember this one morning clearly. Strange, because nothing dramatic happened. No confession, no grand moment. Just dawn entering your apartment slowly through half-open curtains. You were still asleep beside me. The city outside hadn't fully woken yet. Pipes humming softly somewhere in the building. A truck backing up faintly in the distance. Pale light touching the edge of your shoulder beneath the blanket. And I realized something quietly devastating. I wasn't emotionally bracing anymore. Do you understand what I mean? For years, every connection felt temporary before it even began. I kept one hand emotionally near the exit at all times, prepared, detached, ready for disappearance. But lying there beside you, I wasn't preparing to leave. God. That realization scared me more than heartbreak ever did. Because heartbreak at least feels familiar after a while. You learn its shape. Learn where it lives inside your body. Hope is harder. Hope asks things from you. Trust, presence, softness. I didn't know if I remembered how to offer those things anymore. And still, there you were, breathing softly beside me, like my damaged heart wasn't something to fear. I think part of me kept waiting for you to discover I was too emotionally exhausted to love properly. That's another truth I never admitted. I worried my tenderness had expired somewhere along the way, like maybe grief and disappointment and years of emotional isolation had worn me down into someone difficult to stay close to. But you never treated me like a problem to solve. You treated me like someone worth understanding. There's mercy in that. Real mercy. I remember one night we barely spoke at all. We sat on your balcony wearing sweaters against the cold. Traffic lights blinking below us. Your tea growing cold between your hands. And somehow it still felt intimate. That used to confuse me about you. How safe silence felt around you. Not empty. Not strained. Just shared. Maybe that's what love actually becomes after enough life. Not performance. Not intensity every second. Just two tired people finally putting their armor down at the same time. I wish I'd understood that earlier in life. Would have saved me years of pretending. There's something else I need to tell you. I think I spent most of my adulthood believing I had to deserve affection before receiving it. Achievement first, strength first, control first, only then warmth. But you loved differently than that. You offered care in ordinary ways that bypassed all my defenses before I even recognized what was happening. The extra coffee left waiting for me in the morning. Your hand resting briefly against my back while passing behind my chair. The way you listened when I spoke slowly instead of rushing to fill silence. Tiny things. But lonely people survive on tiny things. Maybe that sounds sad. Maybe it is. But I also think it's beautiful in a strange human way. Because after everything, all the years of emotional distance, all the nights spent alone in dim apartments, all the times I convinced myself I no longer needed closeness, my heart still recognized gentleness when it arrived. That means something. I think it always will. And you know what surprises me most? I'm not afraid of being seen by you anymore. That's new, terrifying sometimes, still. There are moments after I tell you something vulnerable where instinct kicks in and I almost pull away. Old habits, old survival reflexes. But now I come back. That's the difference. I come back. I never used to. Maybe healing is smaller than people imagine. Maybe it's just finally staying present after years of emotional disappearance. Maybe it's answering honestly when someone asks if you're okay. Maybe it's leaving space in your closet for another jacket. Maybe it's learning the sound of another person breathing nearby and realizing it comforts you instead of frightening you. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out while I'm speaking. But I know this. You made the future feel less empty, not perfect, not painless, just possible again. And for a man who spent years emotionally preparing for winter, that feels almost unbelievable. Tonight the rain finally stopped outside. The windows are cracked open a little. City light slipping softly across the floor. 2 untouched cups of coffee cooling on the table because we got distracted talking instead of drinking them. You're in the next room moving around quietly, and for the first time in longer than I can measure correctly, the silence in my life no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like peace. Maybe this was what my heart was trying to survive long enough to find. Maybe some wounded parts of us really do keep waiting in the dark for warmth to return. I think mine did. I think yours might have too. And maybe neither of us has to hide from that anymore. If any part of this felt familiar, stay nearby. Subscribe, share your story, or just listen a little longer. Nobody gets through this life completely alone.